Hello and welcome to our Art and Architecture webinar series. I'm Kurt DiCamello, the curator of fine art at American Ancestors. I will be your moderator and virtual MC for today's event. American Ancestors is a nonprofit organization supported by our members and donors. We're the oldest and largest genealogical society in the world. We specialize in providing resources, research, and expertise that uncover the stories of families, family objects, and family homes. We are pleased to offer such programming for our members and friends around the world. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the question panel at any point during today's presentation. We will answer as many as we can at the end. I also want to note that we are broadcasting from our homes to yours with various limitations and distractions. We apologize in advance if there are any interruptions from our end, and thank you for your patience. Even if we do lose connection, you'll have access to a full recording on our website that you can watch at any time. Today's lecture will focus on objects in the Concord Museum that tell stories about the leading up to the big day of April 19th, 1775, and the beginning of the American Revolution. In the aggregate, these stories contribute forcefully to an understanding that the revolution, that great turn from a monarchy to a republic, was well over before the day the Revolutionary War began. I would like to thank an anonymous donor for their support of the Art and Architecture webinar series. David Wood has served as curator of the Concord Museum since 1985, during which time he has overseen the development of over 40 exhibitions. David is also the author of numerous scholarly articles and publications, including the award-winning An Observant Eye, the Thoreau Collection at the Concord Museum, and Eyewitness to Revolution, the American Revolution Collection at the Concord Museum. That book will just be coming out, I believe, next month. Join me in welcoming David Wood.
Thank you, Kurt. So the Eyewitness to Revolution, the book that will be published the end of this month, it focuses on our collection of Revolutionary War material, and that collection began around the middle of the 19th century with the individual in this photograph, Cummings Davis, someone of no particular means and limited education, who nevertheless did an extraordinary job in assembling the material relics of Concord's history. Concord, small town of about 1,200, half a day's ride west of Boston, has a remarkable amount of history for such a little community. But Davis's collection is in a great degree the core of our collection, but also there are contributions from Russell Cattell in particular in the 1930s. Some of the documents are Cattell's, but the real source of the things in our collection are the families that retained them for generations, sometimes only a couple of generations, and then they came into Cummings Davis's hands, or 5, 6, 10 generations, and then they came to the museum. I want to begin with just a brief look at what's going on in this area in the middle and late 18th century. So New England up there on the north, you can probably see Cape Cod there. So there, the economy of that area that doesn't have a staple crop like tobacco or rice that can be shipped direct to England to exchange for credits to use to buy English manufactured goods and to ship back to America and sell. That's the way colonies are supposed to work. They produce the raw material, ship it to the parent country, and buy finished goods, and life goes on that way. It almost worked that way sometimes, but the laws put in place governing that trade had been allowed to relax a bit over the century from the 1660s to the 1760s. And one big change is that at the end of the 7 Years' War, France left Canada. And that caused both sides of the Atlantic, who took an interest in this area, to think again about just what these northern colonies meant. It was the islands. It's the sugar islands that had the money. That's what got the attention of the people in England, not really those 13 colonies that we hold so dear. And that part of that has to do with their ability to provide money for the parent country. So New England did produce lumber, and produced fish from George's Bank is up there in the upper right, and those fishing grounds that attracted Europeans for 1,000 years. So the lesser quality fish, sometimes called Jamaica fish, got shipped down to the islands along with the timber. The islands are producing only sugar, so they have to import food, they have to import lumber. And the better quality fish, sometimes called Madeira fish, is shipped across to the Atlantic and exchanged for fruit and wine there. The driving wheel is sugar, which New England imports as molasses, refines into rum. That gets shipped to Africa, exchanged for imprisoned people who are made slaves in the sugar colonies, and that's the way things are going on. With the conclusion of the war, England has a great debt, £100 million, which one contemporary figured out was a train of wagons filled with silver, 206 miles long. So this is a big debt. And one of the things that Parliament set about to do, it's the lower house of Parliament that is responsible for revenues. They started changing the rules of engagement with respect to commerce. One of the first things that Parliament did after the conclusion of the war, after the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1763, and 2 years later, Parliament passes a law that is avowedly revenue raising. So it is meant to earn money from the colonies. The previous laws had only raised enough revenues to offset the cost of enforcement. This was different. It was meant to raise revenue, and the outcry began immediately, came from the House of Burgesses even before the Stamp Act went into effect. The House of Burgesses sent a petition to Parliament saying that it was unconstitutional to tax a colony that to tax anyone who isn't represented personally or with a representative. The colonies could not have a representative in Parliament. It's just too far away. There's a 30 to 50 day gap in between. There's no representative, and the people who are imposing the tax are not liable to the tax themselves. This is the argument that begins immediately, picked up by James Otis Jr. in Massachusetts right after the Burgesses. And once it starts, that argument never goes away, that all of these revenue-raising attempts are unconstitutional. So the Stamp Act was repealed before it began. The stamps were never distributed. These are two stamps that were used in Quebec, not in the lower colonies. And it was repealed, joyous celebration in Boston, but within a year, a new revenue-raising tax appeared, and those are the Townshend duties, the Townshend Revenue Act of 1767, and that was met with the same protest. It was thought that that in the colonies that the successful protest of the Stamp Act could be repeated with the Townshend Revenue Act. One of the tools that the colonies used with respect to the Stamp Act was a Stamp Act Congress, and that was immediately denounced as an unwarrantable combination. And this matter of unwarrantable combinations among the colonies it takes on a life of its own and finally takes over completely. Parliament does not want the colonies talking amongst themselves and with respect to policy matters. And so Parliament's complaint over that never goes away. And again, that complaint about the unconstitutionality of these revenue-raising acts, that never goes away. The protests in Boston, and Boston is the center of this stuff. The protests in Boston over the Townsend duties become more and more violent over 1767, 1768. There was pageantry, a great deal of street pageants. These were conducted by the Sons of Liberty, which quickly became another one of those unwarrantable combinations. And then with the Liberty affair, the seizure of John Hancock's ship for probably smuggling in some illegal Madeira wine, there was a protest that night. A small boat dragged across Boston and burned right in front of Hancock's house. Well, that was used by the Secretary of State for New England, Lord Hillsborough, as the excuse for sending a couple of regiments to Boston. The 14th and 29th were sent over to Boston, and in 1768. And just at that moment, actually, just as that was happening, and meanwhile, the governorship is changing a bit. Bernard is out, Hutchinson in. That's about to change again. But in 1768, as I said, the troops have arrived. And 2 years later is the Bloody Massacre. That's the title that Revere gave to the print. And I should have mentioned in the beginning, I'll mention now, that all the illustrations that I'm using tonight are objects in the museum's collection. So this is an impression of Revere's Bloody Massacre that belonged to someone, Emerson Cogswell, who was actually at the North Bridge on April 19th. And this came out, Revere had this out quickly enough that it began to influence public opinion about the events. So this is March 5th, 1770, when some members of the 29th were harassed beyond their limit and fired into a crowd of civilians, killing 5. And that from that point on, more or less, almost any narrative of the revolution continues right on to April 19th, smoothly differentiable. There's no break there. But so here in 1770, this print was influencing public opinion. This has there's some firing from the Customs House, renamed Butcher's Hall. That turns out in the trial that never happened. That's also seemingly a reference to the killing of Christopher Sider, the 11-year-old who was killed by a customs official during another one of these pageants that were arranged by the Sons of Liberty. But so in in the print, you can see that the captain is raising a sword as if giving an order. It came out in the trial. That never happened. The soldiers are firing in unison. And again, in the trial, which the defense one of the defense lawyers is John Adams. And in the trial, it came out that didn't happen. But also in the trial, there was mention made of the prints hanging in our parlors that are influencing our opinion about the affairs. They're talking specifically about this print, which Revere had for sale very quickly after the event. That quickness, in part owing to the fact that Revere lifted the design from Henry Pelham, John Singleton Copley's brother-in-law. Pelham was not happy about that, but that's the way it went down. The next usual milestone after the bloody massacre is the destruction of the tea in Boston Harbor, and that's in 1773. The intervening years were fairly quiet. Much as Mercy Otis Warren says in the 1805 history and in fact the commerce levels between the New England colonies and England are taken by economists as more or less normal in that period, but a new venture on the part of Parliament was not as obviously a revenue-raising act. The Townshend Acts had been repealed again. Another of their revenue-raising schemes not turning out. In what happened in 1773 was slightly different. It was an attempt by Parliament to bail out the East India Company by allowing them to import their teas and sell them directly in the colonies rather than through intermediaries in England. But it nevertheless met with the same protest as the Stamp Act and the Townshend Revenue Act. It was an unconstitutional action on the part of Parliament. And so the three ships that came to Boston were not allowed to unload their cargoes. And the clock is ticking. They had 20 days to unload them. Lieutenant Governor Hutchinson would not budge on this and made sure that the duties were paid, would not allow the ships to turn around and go back to England as the protesters in Boston, using the medium of Boston's town meeting. And in fact, in 1768, as the troops were coming, the Boston town meeting more or less seized the reins of government. This was not lost on Parliament, that they actually took up the reins briefly, took up the reins of Parliament, made another one of those unwarrantable combinations by asking all the communities in Massachusetts to send representatives to a convention in Boston to discuss matters, and that was definitely frowned upon. Nothing much came of that, but something similar happened a few years later. So the tea was not allowed to unload, not allowed to leave. The 20 days are up, and an enormous Boston town meeting. Thousands of people are turning out. Everybody's voting, even though Boston might have had 1,400 or so voters. There are many more people than that at the town meeting, so it's held at Old South Meeting House rather than Faneuil Hall as usual. That meeting broke up, and as a preconcerted action, a group of those protesters went down to the wharf and destroyed the tea. Now, this object, which is a twivel is used to cut rough mortises in field work, like making hurdles for sheep, making those temporary fences for sheep. You would use a twivel to cut the mortises, and that's what this thing is. But the grandfather of the founder of this collection, so Cummings Davis's grandfather, a man named Gershom Swan, used this to break open some of those tea chests. There are 240 or so of those chests. They're made out of half-inch wood, and this is apparently a good tool for prying it open. The tea is dumped in the harbor, and that is an unrecoverable act. So the thing that followed from Parliament was first an act closing the port of Boston. Boston's obviously an unsafe place to send the commerce of England. So the port is closed. And that essentially puts Boston out of business. Shortly after, there are more acts that follow that change the governance of Massachusetts, of the Massachusetts Commonwealth. But so that the tea was destroyed in December 30 days, 50 days back and forth. There's almost no time lost by the early spring. There had been substantial changes in the governance of the port, and so on June 1st, the port is going to close. A new governor is in place. This is Thomas Gage, and Thomas Gage was the military, the head of all the military in the North American colonies, and comes to Massachusetts as governor, but is still General Gage. And the in very short order, Gage has the House of Representatives of the town. There's a new election. The House of Representatives is no longer going to meet in Boston. They're going to meet in Salem. And one of the other unwarrantable things that the Massachusetts legislature did in Salem was to send a circular letter out to the other colonies saying there should be a Congress of all the colonies of the continent. They're talking about the northern colonies. And they did actually behind closed, locked doors, and General Gage dissolved. It didn't just prorogue, but dissolved that legislature over that act. So there in July is the call for the Continental Congress to meet in Pennsylvania. And then there are county conventions in Massachusetts, in Middlesex County and Suffolk County, and they call for a provincial Congress so that Massachusetts should have its own Congress. And the recommendation from these county conventions is that there should be a Congress meeting in Concord at the beginning of October, and that Congress could be made of the representatives who were newly elected to the Massachusetts House of Representatives. Everyone was pretty certain that Gage was going to dissolve that group as well, which Gage did. On the end, September 28th, Gage said, "Don't bother showing up. We don't need you here in Salem." 90 members showed up anyway, waited around a couple of days for the governor, who of course didn't show up, and resolved themselves into a provincial Congress. And the figure in this pastel, this is Eleazar Brooks, who is one of those representatives. Eleazar Brooks from Lincoln, which is a town bordering Concord, used to be part of Concord. Eleazar Brooks was in Salem, had his portrait done on that occasion, because this is by Benjamin Blythe, who is in Salem in the fall. So here is a portrait of one of the members of the First Provincial Congress taken at the moment. I wonder if maybe that wonderful orange coat wasn't one that Brooks wore to those first meetings of the Congress. So the Congress met first in Salem, and then adjourned to Concord, and is meeting in Concord, and almost immediately set about putting the Commonwealth on a firmer military footing. And one of the first things that they did was they instructed everyone not to send tax money to Harrison Gray, who is the treasurer for the Massachusetts government. Don't send it to Harrison Gray, but send it to our treasurer, and took that that money, or at least the promise of that money, and started buying supplies. And in pretty short order, the provincial Congress said, we have to raise supplies for an army of 15,000. So they wanted an army about 3 times the size of all the troops that General Gage had in Boston. They clearly have something in mind. And they were confident that they could raise that many soldiers. So they arranged for barrels of spoons like these. These are cleverly made. You sort of turn a dumbbell and hollow out one end, and you've got a spoon. Thousands of these, tens of thousands of these were made, probably in Hingham, shipped in barrels to Concord, and they're stored in Concord along with wooden trenchers and tents and other things. Among the other things that were gathered and stored were entrenching tools. These are 2 shod shovels. They're called shod because they have an iron shoe on the end. Those iron shoes survive in archaeological contexts, but don't survive above ground. The one at the top is the only intact shovel of this form that survived above ground in New England, even though there were barrels of these in Concord. Uh, um, and then below is another one that's a fragmentary one that also survived. But the fact that 2 of them survive in this little community suggests very strongly that these represent exactly the tools that were being stored in Concord, and these are the tools that were distributed and used to do things like throw up the defenses on Bunker Hill. There's also ammunition stored in Concord. These are 2 cannonballs for a 6-pound and a 3-pound cannon. And these were thrown into the mill pond in Concord on April 19th and were recovered in 1835, just representative of tip of the iceberg of the kinds of munitions that are stored. There's gunpowder, there are barrels of pork, barrels of flour, barrels of rice, beef, all kinds of provisions stored, tents, and those bill hooks, other tools, and gunpowder. So all of these stores are in Concord, and it's a sort of open secret that they're here. Everybody knows what's going on. General Gage had spies, but hardly needed them, although Dr. Church was, I'm sure, very helpful. But it's also this kind of activity is going on all across the state, really could not be hidden. So it's clear to everybody that those supplies are being stockpiled in Concord, and some are in Worcester as well. But there's a great deal of material in Concord. The provincial Congress took the Extraordinary Act on April 8th. So this is 11 days before the shooting begins, that took the Extraordinary Act of raising the Massachusetts Army. So they had been talking about an army in the deliberations, calling it first a constitutional army, as sort of one in the teeth for General Gage that what we're doing is constitutional. Gage had immediately protested that these rearrangements of the militia in the forming of the minute companies, so 1/4 of all the militias. Every Massachusetts community has 1 or more militia companies composed of the men 16 to 60 years old, and 1/4 of them, provincial Congress said those should be minute companies, able to turn out at a minute's notice. Gage protested that also the officers are to be elected by town meetings, not appointed by the governor as before. Gage protested that as unconstitutional. And so this reply is, no, this is a constitutional army in the deliberations. That's the phrase they use. That quickly becomes the provincial army, and then as quickly becomes the Massachusetts Army. So on April 8th, they vote to raise the Army, and they issue those rules and regulations for the Massachusetts Army, basically telling what you get court-martialed for and how it's to be conducted. So that's on April 8th. So now everybody knows that something is imminent. The provincial Congress has no doubt at all. When they raised the Army, they notified Connecticut of the fact. They notified New Hampshire of the fact. They sent messages to the Stockbridge Band in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, saying, we're going to raise the Army. Will you come and help us? And the Stockbridge Band said, yep, we will. So did New Hampshire and Connecticut. So this is still 10, 11 days before anything begins, but everybody knows what's going on. Paul Revere knows what's going on. Revere had a lot of responsibility for carrying messages for the provincial Congress. Professionally, Revere was paid for this duty. And so Paul Revere suspected slyly that when it came to it, Revere is going to be out there spreading the alarm. And Revere realized that it might be difficult to get out of Boston when that happens. There are two ways out. You either go out Roxbury Neck, which was a very small causeway that's sometimes underwater, under a neap tide, or you can go across the Charles River. Neither one was very likely. There is a fortress at the Roxbury Neck. You got to get past that. And there is the 70-gun HMS Somerset in the Charles River. You got to get past that under a nearly full moon. So Revere has a backup plan. Joseph Warren had sent Revere to Lexington with a message to Hancock and Adams, who were in Lexington rather than in Boston. They both knew that there was a target on their foreheads and that they were liable to arrest at any moment. So they are out in Lexington, 14 miles from Boston. Revere went out with that message, and on the way back stopped off in Charlestown, spoke with a colonel of the militia there, and arranged this signal. One, if by land, that is, if the troops, when they go out, not if they go out, but when they go out, if they go out by Roxbury Neck, there'll be one lantern in the North Church steeple to tell you that's how they're coming. If they go by sea, that is across the tidal estuary of the Charles River, that's by sea, that's two lanterns. And on the night, Joseph Warren at 10 o'clock sent for Revere, and at that point they knew they'd hauled their boats out, and so it was clear they were going to go across the Charles. And Revere asked a friend to post that signal. As it happened, the signal worked, and Revere also got across the Charles River, nearly got captured, but rode to Lexington and warned Hancock and Adams what was up. Hancock actually already knew about that, but in any event, they were joined by William Dawes, who had managed to talk his way past the fortress at Roxbury Neck. And so Revere and Dawes were going to ride to spread the alarm to Concord. Everyone knew that Concord was the target. They're joined by Samuel Prescott. Revere got captured. They all got captured, but Prescott and Dawes got away. These are these 9 officers who were on the road, stopping all communication that they could. They knew what Revere was up to, and so arrested all 3. 2 got away. Revere's arrested, got released in not far from the meeting house in Lexington, but instead of going home like a sensible person, went back to the Clark house, got Hancock and Adams out of the way, and picked up a trunk of Hancock's correspondence that was in the Buckman Tavern, and set off. Now, because Revere had brought that alarm before midnight, Lexington's militia was mustered. Captain Parker mustered the militia. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. In fact, those 700 regulars who were sent out on this raid were stuck in the mud at Lechmere. So it's after 3 o'clock, and Parker dismisses the militia. Those who were in nearby homes could go home. The rest go to Buckman Tavern, and this clock was ticking in Buckman Tavern that night. This is John Buckman's clock by Nathaniel Mulliken of Lexington, and they could have heard those tense seconds ticking away on this clock. So they were dismissed and told to muster again at the beat of the drum. When the column did finally show up, this is just about daybreak, Parker saw them, gave the order for the drum to beat, and the 60 or 70 members of the Lexington militia reassembled on the common. This is their usual place of parade. The Lexington Common on the left is the Gambrel Roof House, is Buckman Tavern. The barn-like structure is the First Parish, and then on the right, that's the Belfry. And the Major Pitcairn, who's of the Marines, as they're approaching Lexington, rode up to the front to where there were 6 light infantry companies that had been posted at the front. They were going to go hold the bridges in Concord. Pitcairn took those 6 companies, brought them out onto the Lexington Common, and dispersed the militia. Parker had ordered the militia to disperse already. They were dispersing, but for whatever reason, some firing began. Now, I mentioned that Revere is carrying some sensitive papers, John Hancock's papers. Hancock is president of the Provincial Congress, and actually went through the militia. Revere said, "I went through our men," and was half a musket shot away in Revere's account when he heard a shot and turned around, saw smoke in front of the troops that Pitcairn had led out onto the common, and thought it was a pistol shot. A pistol shot would indicate an officer. And then after that, a ragged fire almost immediately followed. There were 8 of the Lexington militia killed immediately, and more wounded. Those are terrific casualties for a party of 70 or fewer. So those, after that firing, the regulars gave 3 cheers. And moved on to Concord with no further incident. But all along, now the alarm had gotten to Concord by about 2 o'clock in the morning, and so the minute and militia companies from Lincoln, Concord, Bedford, they're all assembling in Concord. They send some companies of them out the Lexington Road, the Bay Road. That's the road in the center of this view. So this is after one of Amos Doolittle's engravings. The previous one was the Goodspeed re-engraving of Doolittle's 4 engravings. This is a painting done about 1825 by Timothy Martin Minot after the second of the Doolittle engravings showing the center of Concord with the 700 troops there. There's Major Pitcairn looking toward the North Bridge through a spyglass. There are no trees. You could see the North Bridge then. Six companies went out to the North Bridge. Three of them are going to cross the bridge and go out to Colonel Barrett's house. Three of them will stay and hold the bridge. Before that, some of the minute companies had gone out to meet the column, which was they were coming out with the grenadiers. That's the taller troops, heavier armed troops. They were in the road. Light infantry was they were flanking. They were to the left and the right, and the right infantry drove the provincial troops ahead of them. They went out, crossed the North Bridge, and were out of town, about a mile out of town, waiting to see what was going to go on. So Colonel Smith, who's in overall charge, sent those six companies out to the North Bridge. As I said, three of them stayed at the bridge. Three of them crossed the bridge to go out to Colonel Barrett's house. James Barrett had responsibility for distributing those mountains of material that the Provincial Congress was assembling. Some of it was out at Barrett's house, but there was a shell game going on. Congress knew this raid was coming, so on April 18th, they were still busily giving orders for tons of material to be moved out of Concord. But the three companies went out to Barrett's house. James Barrett was not there at the moment, but Rebecca Barrett was, and opened this door. The Barrett house is about 1705. This is a door that was part of a renovation of about 1760 in the kitchenelle. It's this door that the troops came to, this door that Rebecca Barrett opened and looked out to see 100 soldiers with bayonets fixed, standing in the yard. And of course, Rebecca Barrett knew exactly what they were there for, but there really wasn't much there. So those companies were searching that, were searching the Barrett house. Meanwhile, there are three companies back at the North Bridge. One of those companies was the 4th, and they were stationed by the home of David Brown. David Brown was the captain of one of the minute companies, and one of the members of the 4th smashed David Brown's mirror, and that's what this is. David Brown had actually supervised the construction of the North Bridge, reconstruction of the North Bridge in 1760. This is a piece of the North Bridge. And this is another of the Doolittle engravings showing the North Bridge. On the left is David Brown's house. On the right is Major Buttrick's house. And there's the bridge in between. At this point, the three companies have crossed back over the bridge, and there are now about 450 provincial troops who had assembled on the meadow that's on the horizon on the left half of this. They are up there in that meadow. And while they're waiting there, the adjutant, this is Joseph Hosmer, the adjutant of the day, arranged them into two lines, minute companies in one line, militia in another. And while they were there, they changed their flints. So these flints were found in an archaeological context in the 1930s in two lines roughly facing the North Bridge. They had changed their flints. This isn't documented anywhere else except in these objects that they changed their flints, which is a very provocative thing to do. A flint, after it gets used a few times, doesn't spark as well. You change your flint when you want it to really, really work. So they did this in full view of those troops at the bridge. They were fired on at the bridge. First, 3 warning shots into the river. They had marched down in military order. Many witnesses note that. And in the first firing, Abner Hosmer was killed. This is Abner Hosmer's powder horn, which stayed in the family, retaining its original rare woven strap. And Isaac Davis, captain of the Acton Company, was also killed and then was succeeded by Lieutenant Hayward. This is Hayward's sword, who is now captain of the Acton Company. And among those people who changed their flints, dropped it at their feet, and then fired when ordered to do so, was Casey Whitney, who was enslaved by the muster master, and was almost certainly at the North Bridge. This is Casey Whitney's looking glass. Amos Barrett was another of those who changed the flint. Barrett left a wonderful account of what transpired. This is Amos Barrett's powder horn. This is Samuel Dakin's Fowler. The provincial troops are, because they're militia, there's civilians, they're carrying civilian arms. This is a Fowler, nice French Fowler of the 1730s, but it had been fitted with a bayonet lug, later cut down in the course of the 19th century, and that's Dakin's powder horn. Some musket balls were recovered from the field by William Emerson's house. The three on the right, Henry Thoreau found in that field, and they're provincial size. In other words, they're smaller, the smaller size balls that fit those Fowlers. And so these are, this is part of the shot heard round the world, as Ralph Waldo Emerson said. There are 4 communities at the North Bridge, but more and more join. This is a Fowler that belonged to a Minuteman from Framingham. They had to march 30 miles, but they got to Concord by 1:30 in the afternoon and hit the column as it's returning to Boston. So at that point, those 700 troops are outnumbered. They're outnumbered, and that discrepancy grows through the course of the day. So there are, at this point, this is the fourth, this is the Goodspeed re-engraving of the fourth of the Doolittle engravings, and this shows Lexington, where a relief column had been sent out. They were delayed as well, but another 700 troops came out to relieve the returning column. They had 2 cannon with them, immediately set fire to 3 houses in order to provide better protection for the troops and give them a little breather, but then they continued their return to Boston, and it's at this point on that the worst firing of the day begins, and as they approach Menotomy, modern-day Arlington, it gets worse and worse. There are now possibly 3,000 or 4,000, maybe more, provincial soldiers encircling this returning column, firing on them continually. It was so bad at the end that one officer apparently discarded this musket and nice French silver mounts on this sword. There was no officer from a silver-faced company killed or captured. It looks like these were discarded. And the watch in the upper right is from a member of one of Danvers' minute companies. They had to march at 4 miles an hour to get here. But again, there was absolutely no wait. The alarm comes, the troops set off. Everybody knew it was happening. There was no deliberation, no delay. Finally, the returning column gets, just at sunset, gets back to Cambridge on at least 2 occasions. They'd nearly been surrounded and captured. It didn't happen. They get back, but now they're surrounded by 5,000. Within a day or two, there are 20,000 soldiers, provincial soldiers. Now the men from New Hampshire, On the day, there were 23 communities, those within riding distance or marching distance, 23 communities in the field against the regulars. There are 20,000 within a couple of days. And this is the Bloody Butchery broadside. It's based on the report in the Salem papers of April 23rd of just what happened. And this is beginning to spread the news. There are just 40 coffins here. There were actually 49 provincials killed, 73 of the regulars killed, more than twice as many regulars wounded, but fewer provincials wounded than killed, as the charge is leveled right in this broadside, and it's still assumed by many historians that the regulars were killing the wounded, which is what those numbers suggest. I have one more. I want to back up a little bit for this one. This is Mary Jones's needlework. Mary Jones was trying to go to school in Boston in 1768 and was attending the school of Amy and Elizabeth Cumming, who are direct importers, but they did not sign the non-importation agreement. So it's Amy and Elizabeth Cumming are on the front page of each newspaper in Boston, shaming them for not refusing to import. They finally had to close their school. Mary Jones folded up this partially unfinished needlework into a 5-inch square and went back home to Weston. Mary Jones was Henry Thoreau's grandmother, and so Thoreau heard some stories about what happened in that period. Mary Jones sprung her brother from jail in Concord by secreting a knife in the food that she brought to the jail, and also brought them cherries. And Thoreau notes it was an early spring that year. If cherries are ripe in June, it was June of 75 when Mary Jones got her brother out, then that agrees with other accounts that the grass was waving in the fields, and that the apple trees were in blossom. So Mary Jones's extraordinary saga is captured in this heraldic work, which is a coat of arms after the Gore, the design of the mantling provided by John Gore, and this is one of 30 or so of this group with the Gore mantlings around it, produced by 5 or 6 different schools in Boston in the 1760s and 70s. The tradition actually continued a little bit after the Revolution. And this is the cover of Eyewitness to Revolution, which is about to be published. At the end of this month, it'll be published.
Well, David, thank you for that incredible presentation. Hearing you talk makes me very proud to be a New Englander. I also want to mention, for those of you who are into clocks, that we are lucky at American Ancestors to have in our 7th floor reading room in Boston a Mulliken tall case clock that's very similar to the one that David showed you today. Before we get to your questions, we have some upcoming programs I would like to mention. Between April 2nd and April 30th, an award-winning team of our genealogical experts will be leading a 5-session online seminar on finding your Revolutionary War patriot and loyalist ancestors. On April 4th, I will be giving an online lecture on Baroque architecture in the English country house. And then on May 9th, I will be hosting an online lecture by the Countess of Derby on the American travel journals of the 14th Earl of Derby, who later became Prime Minister. Now, let's get to your questions. Go ahead and type your query into the question panel, and we will answer as many of them as we can in the time we have left. David, I'm going to start off by asking you, how much did the closing of Boston's port hurt the Massachusetts economy?
Well, it was devastating. I mean, and the other colonies recognized that and sent supplies. There are lots of supplies being sent into Salem and then trucked into Boston. Maybe the distress was slightly exaggerated by the resistance, but maybe not. I mean, with the port closed, everybody's out of work.
Yeah, Boston being so dependent on its port. Why did the Continental Congress meet in Philadelphia and not in Boston?
That was the so that's coming out of behind closed doors deliberations, and I don't know any direct documentation of that. I think it's for the convenience of the other colonies. So Pennsylvania is a middle colony, close enough to New York, Delaware, Maryland, and so following that Pennsylvania is a reasonable place if you want all the colonies there.
That makes perfect sense. I've always heard for years that Boston was considered too much of a firebrand, too hot, and that Philadelphia was more moderate and therefore more attractive. But
Boston was also occupied by 6,000
well,
regular troops.
then there is that. Um, Gail wants to know what the role of the Committee of Correspondence was. Something I've never heard of before, actually.
Well, those are one of those unwarrantable combinations, and that really got legs in 1772. It was an impetus of John Adams. Committee of Correspondence is just a committee in one of the colonies writing to a committee in another of the colonies. And that, again, is what Parliament says you're not supposed to do that. That's not the way our government's organized. But they did it anyway. And once those committees started up, so the Committee of Correspondence is the kind of formal one, and it strengthened over time. But there are others. The Sons of Liberty, starting in 1765, are corresponding with other Sons of Liberty and saying we should all get together. The Merchants and Traders of Boston are communicating with other groups of merchants and traders in Philadelphia and New York. Again, these are unwarrantable in the eyes of Parliament, but this is how the communication is going on.
Tim asked, was it John or Samuel Adams that was in Lexington?
John.
That
Oh,
was
I'm sorry. Samuel.
which
It was
actually
Samuel. It was Samuel Adams. I was still thinking of committees of correspondence. It's Sam Adams who's in Lexington with John Hancock.
which actually enables me to add a tack-on question to that. Was Sam Adams as important in the revolution as we've always been told?
Uh, well, there's a seminar topic. It's in a way, the more I look at the evidence, and I really use just first person evidence for this, for eyewitness to revolution, in keeping with the first person quality of these objects. As I read more and more of that, I really see the distribution or the responsibility distributed very widely. And so I think it's fairly easy to exaggerate Samuel Adams' role, but it's also probably pretty easy to not know what Sam Adams was really up to. So if I think a consideration of the Sons of Liberty, that first group that's orchestrating those pageants in protest pageants in the streets of Boston, Samuel Adams is closely involved with that. And so it's a matter of, well, how important was that? So it's a good question that I can't answer.
Well, that's that's perfectly fine. I have a question. Was the 7 Years' War called something different in America?
It's often called the French and Indian Wars in America, but it's one of those wars. It's one of those imperial wars between England and France. They would pick one up and put it down and then pick it up again. But it's the 7 Years' War. There were also these well, the War of the Spanish Succession, which ended in 1712. That's a related sort of thing, and that has different names in America as well.
Terry asked if there's any evidence that Mary Flint Hartwell assisted in spreading the alarm of the British being in the area.
You mean of Hartwell Tavern?
I assume so. She was
Yeah. Well,
there.
there are, it's interesting. You would think that all this stuff was worked out in the 19th century. It's just not the case. And the exactly who got the word and what they did with it, there are still some revelations coming out. So who told Bedford, and so on. And so I think Mary Hartwell has a role in that. Hartwell's narratives. I avoided 19th century narratives for Eyewitness to Revolution because they're tendentious. And Hartwell's is a 19th century one, but you know, just because you don't use it as positive evidence, that doesn't mean it should be dismissed outright. So Hartwell's narrative is interesting and is part of that slightly gray moment of just exactly who's doing it. But the thing is, it's not just Revere, as Longfellow tells us. It's not just Revere and Dawes and Prescott. In the Suffolk Resolves, this is September of 1774. They say exactly how the alarm is supposed to go. You send a written message to the committee of correspondence in the next town, and they send out more riders. So this is spreading at about 7 miles an hour. There are riders all over the place carrying news, and that's how these 23 communities, the militia and Minutemen from these 23 communities, they know exactly where to hit the column as it's returning to Boston because their riders out there telling them, that's where they are, go there. They are all over the place. And Mary Hartwell is part of that network.
Well, this actually is a nice appendage to that. Mary wants to know what was the role or contribution of women in Concord and Lexington during the conflagrations.
Well, our most famous, I think, is Martha Moulton, who got a pension for serving on April 19th. They were burning some of the carriages. They didn't get much, I should say. They destroyed about 50 barrels of flour. They really didn't get what they had come out for. But they were burning some gun carriages and they set fire to the townhouse. And Martha Moulton saw that. Martha's two doors down. And begged them to put it out and had to struggle to get them to put it out. The smoke from that fire is what was seen from the North Bridge. That fire and a couple of more, they cut down the Liberty Pole, which had a flag flying, and burned it. So that smoke is rising. That's what led Colonel Barrett to order the militia and minute companies to recross the bridge, go back into Concord, don't let them burn the town down. And so Martha is part of that saga as well.
Well, speaking of the North Bridge, Bill would like to know if any part of it remains other than the piece that you showed during your presentation.
We have two more pieces like that. One's on loan to the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia. The other's on loan to the Army Museum in Virginia. And we also have souvenirs made from the bridge. And so what happened was the bridge was taken down in 1793 and relocated. So there's no bridge where the North Bridge was. They abandoned the Groton Road, took another way out of town. But some of the footings and other pieces of the bridge were left in the river. So in 1874, when they put up a new bridge to provide access to Daniel Chester French's Concord Minuteman of 1775, they found some pieces of the bridge in the river. Those were made into souvenirs. We have lots of them here. And then again in the 1960 something, when they rebuilt the bridge, keeps getting washed out. They rebuilt it again, and they found some more pieces of the bridge and the footing. That includes the three large pieces that we have, and then other smaller pieces.
Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize anybody who's planning to go, that bridge that's there today is definitely a recreation.
It is,
Um,
yeah.
so speaking on scenery, Lisa wants to know if there are any buildings or the cemetery that you depicted in the drawings still around today.
They're all still there. If you hike up onto the hill burying ground there and stand right where Major Pitcairn is standing with the spyglass. You will look down on Mr. Taylor's house, which is now popularly called Wright Tavern. So the tavern in the center of town, it's still there. The first parish is still in the same position. It's not the same building, but it's still there. And right in front of you is, as you're standing on the hill ground, is a house that was there. Doolittle, for the sake of the art of the thing, took that house away so that you could see the center of Concord. But that's still there. That's a witness house. Right up the road, there are 4 or 5 more witness houses. There are lots of them that still survive.
I love that they're called witness houses. Kathleen wants to know on April 19th, what was the clothing like that the Minutemen and the militia were wearing?
One account, so they're not wearing uniforms. They're militia, they're citizen soldiers, but several accounts uh, make it pretty clear that people dressed in their finest. This was serious. They took
Oh,
this
interesting.
seriously. The Acton men seem to have powdered their hair. Uh, Ezekiel
Wow.
Ezekiel Marsh, whose watch we saw, Ezekiel Marsh is carrying a watch. It's and one Captain Miles, I think it was, said to the minister in Concord that he went into that service as if going to church. So you can imagine they're wearing their best. Uh,
That is so cool. Sharon has a very interesting question. She said that she is aware of a committee of observation in Maryland, but didn't know there was one in Massachusetts. And can you expand on that?
yeah, everybody's got one.
Well, there you go.
No, they do. So this is why unwarrantable that's why these combinations are dangerous. There is a lot of parallel. So you've got committees of correspondence, committees of safety, which is basically who's in charge of the militia, committees of supplies, gathering things, and correspondence. Committee of observation, I'm not sure exactly which one that is, but you get committees of observation keeping an eye on who is violating the non import laws, for instance. Those groups are sometimes called committees of observation, but it's, I don't know if it's absolutely the case, but I think every colony had one.
That's very interesting. Um, do you know if the British ever occupied the Hancock Clark House during the Revolution?
No, that's where Hancock and Adams were. They didn't spend that much time there. They were in the tavern. They were in Monroe Tavern. Uh, uh, Percy seems to have taken that, if only briefly, taken that for headquarters, or perhaps they were treating the wounded there. So they were in the tavern. They were in Monroe Tavern. They were not in the Hancock Clark House.
Jan says that she has an ancestor from Stockbridge who she knows served in the Stockbridge militia and fought
Ah,
at Lexington and Concord. Do you know what the militia from Stockbridge did during the battle?
well, they didn't get here in time actually for Lexington and Concord, but they're here within a few days. The Stockbridge Band, which is now the Stockbridge Muncie Band of Mohican, the Stockbridge Band was here within 2 days, 130-mile march. And they were here within 2 days. It was the Stockbridge Band that the committee of that the provincial Congress wrote to on April 8th when they said, "We're raising the army. Will you come?" They said yes, and they did. So when they got the alarm, probably late in the day on the 19th, they set right off.
David, you are just an amazing fount of information on the revolution, particularly obviously in Lexington and Concord. That's my way of ending this and saying that that is all time we have for questions. If you have other questions, you can always contact us at heritagetours@americanancestors.org. Thank you again for joining us today. As you leave the event, you'll have the opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback. As we continue to expand our webinars and online offerings, any feedback is extremely helpful and much appreciated. This free webinar was made possible by the generous support of members and friends around the world. Please consider making a gift to American Ancestors to keep these programs free and to create more programs for you and others to enjoy. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you soon again on our future online programs. Goodbye for now.